The moment I saw my new landlord, I forgot why I had come there. 5 years ago, I had secretly fallen for him. I thought he had never even noticed me. But when he opened the apartment door, he looked at me and said, "You finally came back." I froze, because I had never told him where I was going. Ryan had always believed that moving to a new city would feel exciting. Instead, it felt exhausting. After accepting a position at one of the city's most respected architecture firms, he had spent nearly 2 weeks searching for an apartment. Most places were either too expensive, too small, or located so far from work that he would spend half his life sitting in traffic. Then he found apartment 4B. The photographs immediately caught his attention. The building was old but beautifully restored, with tall brick walls, enormous windows, wooden floors, and a narrow balcony overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. The apartment was larger than anything Ryan expected to afford, and the rent was surprisingly reasonable. It almost seemed too good to be true. He contacted the property manager and received a reply the same afternoon. Everything was arranged through email. The paperwork was simple, the background check went smoothly, and the apartment was officially reserved. There was only one thing left: meet the owner before signing the final lease. Ryan didn't think much about it. He had met landlords before. Usually, they were older men or women who wanted to finish the paperwork as quickly as possible. So, on Friday afternoon, Ryan drove across the city, parked outside the building, and grabbed his folder of documents. He was already 10 minutes late. "Perfect," he muttered. He hurried toward the entrance, checking his phone as he walked. The building looked even better in person. Large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight. Green vines climbed part of the brick wall, and several flower pots sat beside the entrance. It had the kind of quiet charm Ryan had always wanted. He climbed the first step. Then the entrance door suddenly opened. Someone walked out. Ryan looked down at his phone at exactly the wrong moment. He collided with the person. "Oh, sorry," Ryan said quickly. "It's okay." Ryan froze. That voice. There was something about it. Something familiar. Slowly, he raised his eyes. For a moment, his mind simply stopped working. He knew that face. He hadn't seen it in 5 years. But he knew it. The tall figure standing in front of him had changed, but not enough to hide who he was. Shorter hair. Broader shoulders. A sharper jaw. Older features. But those eyes were exactly the same. Clear blue. Impossible to forget. Ryan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The man stared at him with the same stunned expression. Then his eyebrows lifted. "Ryan." Ryan's heart dropped. "Ethan." Neither of them moved. Neither seemed to know what to say. 5 years disappeared in a single second. Ryan suddenly remembered a high school hallway. A soccer field. A classroom filled with afternoon sunlight. Ethan laughing with his friends. Ethan walking past Ryan's desk. Ethan saying his name. And Ryan pretending not to care. Because back then, Ryan had been completely convinced that Ethan would never notice someone like him. Ethan had been popular. Captain of the soccer team. Good at school. Confident. Friendly. Everyone seemed to know him. Ryan had been the quiet student who preferred drawing buildings in the margins of his notebooks. He had secretly liked Ethan for almost 2 years. He had never told anyone. Not even his closest friend. And then, after graduation, Ryan had left town for university. He never looked back. Or at least, he had tried not to. Now Ethan was standing directly in front of him. "Wow," Ethan finally said. Ryan gave a nervous laugh. "Yeah. It's really you." "I guess it is." Ethan smiled. That smile was dangerous. It was exactly the same smile Ryan remembered. "So what are you doing here?" Ryan looked toward the building. I'm supposed to meet the owner. Ethan's smile slowly disappeared. Oh. Ryan frowned. What? Ethan looked at the folder in Ryan's hand. What apartment? 4B. There was a long silence. Ryan stared at him. Ethan stared back. Then Ethan gave a quiet laugh. No way. What? You're Ryan Parker. Ryan swallowed. Yes. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. You're the one renting 4B? Ryan looked at the building again, then back at him. Wait. He pointed toward the entrance. You're the owner? Ethan nodded. Ryan actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Mostly because the situation was too ridiculous to process. You own this building? Technically, yes. Since when? About 2 years. Ryan looked up at the 4-story brick building, then at Ethan, then back at the building. You. Ethan laughed. That's what I keep telling people. Ryan couldn't help smiling. He had spent the entire morning worrying about meeting a stranger. Instead, he had walked directly into the past. Your assistant never mentioned your name, Ryan said. I usually let her handle the paperwork. That explains a lot. Ethan nodded. Then his expression softened. So, you're moving back? Ryan hesitated. Yeah. I got a job here. Architecture. Ryan looked surprised. How did you know? You always wanted to do architecture. Ryan stared at him. You remember that? Ethan smiled. I remember a lot. Those 4 words made Ryan's stomach tighten. He quickly looked away. Anyway, Ethan said, opening the door, you should probably see the apartment before you decide. I've already seen the pictures. Pictures don't show everything. Ryan followed him inside. The lobby was beautiful. Old wooden floors. Warm lighting. Exposed brick. A large staircase curved toward the upper floors. Ryan immediately noticed the craftsmanship. You renovated this yourself? Most of it. Ryan looked at him. You. Ethan shrugged. I learned. Ryan smiled. You were always good at fixing things. You remember that? Ryan suddenly realized what he had said. Yeah. Ethan looked amused. So you remember me, too. Ryan laughed awkwardly. Of course I remember you. The words came out softer than he intended. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he started walking toward the stairs. The elevator is being repaired. Ryan followed. Of course it is. You're going to complain already? I've known you for approximately 3 minutes, and you're already making me climb 4 floors. Ethan laughed. There it was. That laugh. Ryan remembered spending entire afternoons finding excuses to walk past the soccer field just to hear it. He immediately hated himself for remembering. They reached the 2nd floor. Then the 3rd. Ryan tried not to look exhausted. Ethan glanced back. You okay? Fine. You're breathing pretty hard. I've been moving all day. Excuses. Ryan smiled. Maybe you're just walking too fast. Ethan slowed down. Better. Much. They reached the 4th floor. Ethan stopped outside apartment 4B. He pulled a key from his pocket. For some reason, Ryan's heart started beating faster. Ethan unlocked the door and stepped aside. After you. Ryan walked inside. His breath caught. The apartment was even better than the photographs. Sunlight poured through the enormous windows. The wooden floor looked newly restored. The kitchen was modern but still matched the character of the building. There was a small balcony overlooking the quiet street. Ryan slowly walked toward it. This is beautiful. Ethan watched him. You like it? Ryan nodded. I love it. Something changed in Ethan's expression. Relief, maybe. Or something else. I was hoping you would. Ryan turned around. You were. Ethan looked away. I spent almost a year renovating this apartment. Ryan looked around again. You did all this? Most of it. Why? Ethan shrugged. I wanted it to feel like home. Ryan smiled. Well, you succeeded. Ethan looked at him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt strangely familiar. Ryan remembered those tiny pauses from high school. The moments when Ethan would stand beside him after class. Neither of them knowing what to say. Ryan had always assumed those awkward silences were because Ethan didn't care. Now he wasn't so sure. Ethan finally walked toward the kitchen. Want some coffee? Ryan blinked. Now. You've been moving all day. Are you always this nice to tenants? Ethan smiled. No. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Good answer. They sat at the kitchen island with 2 cups of coffee. Ryan studied Ethan quietly. There was something different about him. He was still confident, but there was a calmness now that hadn't existed in high school. He seemed more settled, more mature, more comfortable with himself. Ryan wondered what had happened during those 5 years. Ethan looked across the table. So, you disappeared after graduation. Ryan smiled faintly. I went to university. I know. Ryan's smile faded. You knew? Ethan nodded. I heard you got into a university several hours away. Ryan stared at him. How? Ethan shrugged. People talked. Ryan almost laughed. People didn't talk about me. I did. Ryan froze. Ethan seemed to realize what he had said. He looked down at his coffee. I mean, I noticed when you left. Ryan didn't know how to respond. 5 years ago, those words would have meant everything to him. Even now, they made something inside his chest shift. I didn't think anyone noticed. Ethan looked up. I noticed. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither looked away. Then Ethan cleared his throat. You should read the lease. Ryan smiled nervously. Right. He picked up the paperwork. But his mind wasn't on the lease anymore. It was on Ethan. On the strange coincidence that had brought them back together. On all the things neither of them had said 5 years ago. Eventually, Ryan signed the final page. Ethan signed underneath it. Then he reached into his pocket and placed a key on the counter. Ryan looked at it. Ethan smiled. Welcome home, Ryan. Ryan picked up the key. It was cold against his palm. But somehow, the moment felt warm. He looked at Ethan. Thanks. Ethan nodded. Then he hesitated. I guess I'll see you around. Ryan smiled. You own the building. Exactly. They both laughed. Ethan walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around. Ryan. Yeah. I'm glad you're here. Ryan's heart skipped. He smiled. Me too. The door closed behind Ethan. Ryan stood alone in the apartment, still holding the key. 5 years ago, he had left town believing Ethan had never noticed him. Now, somehow, the boy he'd secretly loved had become his landlord. And for the first time, Ryan wondered whether maybe he had never been as invisible to Ethan as he'd always believed. Ryan had been living in apartment 4B for almost a week when the strange feeling began. At first, he thought it was simply because everything was new. The apartment still smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood. Boxes were stacked against the bedroom wall. His kitchen shelves were only half organized, and he still hadn't figured out which light switch controlled the hallway. But there was another reason the apartment felt unfamiliar. Ethan. Every time Ryan heard footsteps in the hallway, he found himself wondering if they belonged to him. It was ridiculous. Ethan was his landlord. Nothing more. At least, that's what Ryan kept telling himself. On Monday morning, Ryan discovered that the kitchen cabinet above the sink wouldn't close properly. He tried pushing it. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. "Great," he muttered. He took out his phone and stared at Ethan's contact for several seconds. He really didn't want to bother him. Finally, he sent a message. "Ryan, sorry to bother you. I think the kitchen cabinet is broken." The reply came almost immediately. "Ethan, I'll be there in 10 minutes." Ryan stared at the screen. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. Ryan opened the door. Ethan stood there holding a small toolbox. "You actually came. You said something was broken." "It was just a cabinet." "I know." Ethan walked inside. Ryan stepped aside. "I could have fixed it myself." "Could you?" Ryan looked offended. "Yes." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Ryan sighed. "Probably not." Ethan laughed. He walked into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and examined the hinge. "Loose screw. That sounds serious. Terrifying." Ryan smiled. Ethan crouched down and began fixing it. Ryan leaned against the counter. "You still fix everything yourself?" "Mostly." "You were always like that." Ethan looked up. "You remember?" Ryan nodded. "In school, you fixed that broken chair in the library." Ethan smiled. "You remember that? I was sitting nearby. I thought nobody noticed." Ryan paused. There it was again. That strange feeling. Nobody noticed. Except apparently Ethan. The cabinet was fixed within minutes. Ethan opened and closed the door twice. "Perfect." Ryan nodded. "Thanks." "You're welcome." Ethan looked toward the coffee maker. "You still drink it black?" Ryan froze. "What?" "Your coffee." Ryan stared at him. "How do you know how I drink my coffee?" Ethan shrugged. "You always drank it black at school." Ryan couldn't believe it. "That was 5 years ago." "I know. How do you remember that?" Ethan smiled slightly. "I remember things." Ryan laughed nervously. "You remember way too much." "Maybe." Ethan picked up his toolbox. "Anyway, I should go." Ryan watched him leave. After the door closed, Ryan stood silently in the kitchen. He couldn't stop thinking about the coffee. It wasn't an important detail. But Ethan remembered it. That evening, Ryan made himself a cup of coffee and sat near the window. He tried to convince himself it meant nothing. Maybe Ethan simply had a good memory. Maybe he remembered everyone's habits. But then another memory surfaced. High school. Ryan sitting in history class. His black sketchbook open on the desk. He used to draw buildings whenever the teacher was talking about something boring. He had never shown anyone those sketches. At least, he thought he hadn't. The next afternoon, Ethan knocked again. Ryan opened the door. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." Ethan held up a small envelope. "Mail for you." Ryan took it. "Thanks." Ethan glanced past him. His eyes landed on the sketchbook sitting on the kitchen table. "You still draw?" Ryan looked at the sketchbook. "Sometimes." Ethan smiled. "You used to draw during history class." Ryan's expression changed. "You remember that too?" "Of course." "You actually saw me drawing?" Ethan nodded. "All the time." Ryan stared at him. "I thought nobody noticed." Ethan smiled. "You were always drawing." Ryan picked up the sketchbook. What did I draw back then? Buildings, windows, teachers when they weren't looking. Ryan laughed. You remember the teachers? Not all of them. But you remember me. Ethan became quiet. Yes. The answer was simple. Too simple. Ryan didn't know what to do with it. He looked down at his sketchbook. Why? Ethan hesitated. Because you were interesting. Ryan's heart skipped. Interesting. You always looked like you were somewhere else. Ryan smiled. I probably was. I know. Ryan looked up. Ethan was already walking toward the door. Wait. Ethan turned. You said you remember me. I do. Why? Ethan smiled faintly. Maybe I'll tell you someday. Then he left. Ryan closed the door. He leaned against it and sighed. This was becoming dangerous. Not because Ethan was his landlord, but because every conversation was slowly changing the version of high school Ryan had carried in his head for years. He had always believed Ethan barely knew his name. Now he was discovering that Ethan had noticed his coffee, his sketches, his habits, even where he sat. A few days later, they met in the lobby. Ethan was carrying a box of tools. Ryan had just returned from work. Long day? Ethan asked. You have no idea. Architecture firm? Ryan nodded. You like it. I love it. Ethan smiled. You always wanted to do this. Ryan stopped. You remember that too? I told you. I remember. Ryan laughed softly. You're making me question my entire memory. Maybe your memory isn't as accurate as you think. Ryan studied him. What does that mean? Ethan set the box down. I think you remember high school differently than I do. Ryan's smile disappeared. How? Ethan looked at him for a long moment. You thought you were invisible. Ryan swallowed. I was. No. Ethan's voice was quiet. You weren't. Ryan stared at him. Ethan stepped slightly closer. I noticed you. Ryan couldn't speak. You were always sitting 2 rows behind me, Ethan continued. You carried that same black sketchbook everywhere. You arrived 3 minutes before class every morning. Ryan's eyes widened. You remember that? Yes. Why? Ethan smiled. Because I noticed you. Ryan's heart was beating faster now. He looked away. I spent years thinking you didn't even know I existed. Ethan's expression softened. You were never invisible to me, Ryan. Silence filled the lobby. For years, Ryan had imagined Ethan forgetting him completely. He had convinced himself that his feelings had always been one-sided. But standing there now, he realized something. Maybe the past hadn't been what he thought. Maybe Ethan had been looking back too. Ryan finally smiled. Then why didn't you ever say anything? Ethan looked down. Maybe I was afraid. Of what? That you didn't feel the same. Ryan almost laughed. The irony was painful. Because he had been afraid of exactly the same thing. Neither of them had known. Neither had asked. And 5 years had passed because of it. Ethan picked up his toolbox. I should let you get upstairs. Ryan nodded. Yeah. Ethan started walking away. Then Ryan called his name. Ethan. He turned. Ryan smiled. I think I'd like to hear the rest of those memories someday. Ethan smiled back. I think I'd like to tell you. He disappeared up the stairs. Ryan remained in the lobby for another few seconds. For the first time, the past didn't feel like something he had lost. It felt like something he was finally beginning to understand. And perhaps the most surprising part was realizing that Ethan had been carrying memories of him all along. The evening began with a simple text. "Ethan, you awake?" Ryan looked at the message while sitting at his kitchen table. It was almost 10 at night. He smiled. "Ryan, unfortunately." "Why?" A few seconds later, another message appeared. "Ethan, rooftop. 10 minutes?" Ryan stared at the screen. There was something about the invitation that made his heart beat faster. He typed back, "Ryan, okay." The rooftop was one of Ryan's favorite places in the building. He hadn't discovered it during his first few days there. Ethan had shown it to him later, explaining that most tenants rarely came upstairs. Tonight, the city stretched beneath them. Thousands of lights flickered between the buildings. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze moved across the rooftop. Ethan was already there. He stood near the railing, holding 2 cups of coffee. Ryan walked toward him. "You brought coffee?" Ethan smiled. "I remembered." Ryan took the cup. "Black. Black." Ryan laughed quietly. "You really do remember everything." "Not everything. Just suspiciously important things?" Ethan looked at him. "Maybe." Ryan leaned against the railing. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had become familiar. Finally, Ethan said, "I've been thinking about something." Ryan looked at him. "That's dangerous." Ethan laughed. "I've been thinking about high school." Ryan's smile faded slightly. "So have I. I figured." Ethan looked toward the city. "I keep wondering how we managed to misunderstand each other for so long." Ryan smiled sadly. "Maybe we were both terrible at communicating." "We definitely were." Ryan took a sip of coffee. "So tell me." "Tell you what?" "What you remember." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he began. "I remember the first time I noticed you." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "You said you noticed me before." "I did." "But when?" Ethan smiled. "Your first month at school." Ryan thought back. "I barely remember that time." "I do." Ethan rested his arms against the railing. "You were always carrying that black sketchbook." Ryan smiled. "I loved that thing." "You still have it?" "Somewhere." "You used to sit alone during lunch." Ryan looked down. "I wasn't alone." "You were." "I had people." "I know. But you always seemed like you were somewhere else." Ryan smiled faintly. "I probably was." Ethan laughed. "I wanted to talk to you." Ryan looked at him. "Really? Really? Then why didn't you?" Ethan shrugged. "I was nervous." Ryan actually laughed. "You?" "Yes, me." "You were captain of the soccer team." "So?" "Everyone wanted to talk to you." "That didn't mean I knew how to talk to you." Ryan stared at him. Ethan continued. "You seemed different." "Different how?" "Quiet. Smart. Always focused on something." He smiled. "And whenever I tried to get near you, you looked like you wanted me to leave." Ryan's eyes widened. "What?" "You always seemed distant." Ryan shook his head. "I wasn't distant." "You were." "I was terrified." Ethan turned toward him. "Terrified of what?" Ryan laughed awkwardly. "Of you." Ethan looked genuinely confused. "Me?" Ryan nodded. "You were popular. Confident. Everyone liked you." "So I thought you would think I was boring." Ethan stared at him. "You thought that?" "Of course." Ryan looked down at his coffee. "I had a huge crush on you." The words came out before he could stop them. Silence. Ethan didn't move. Ryan's face became warm. I wasn't planning to say that. Ethan smiled slowly. I was hoping you would. Ryan looked up. What? Ethan laughed softly. I had a crush on you too. Ryan blinked. No. Yes. No way. Ethan nodded. For a long time. Ryan stared at him in disbelief. How long? Ethan looked toward the city. Almost 2 years. Ryan laughed. You're kidding. I'm not. I spent 2 years thinking you didn't even know my name. I knew everything. Ryan shook his head. This is ridiculous. I know. Ryan started laughing. Ethan joined him. For several seconds, they simply stood there laughing at the absurdity of it. 2 people. 2 crushes. 2 years. And neither had said anything. When the laughter faded, Ryan looked at him. So what happened? Ethan's expression became more serious. I wanted to tell you. Why didn't you? I thought you weren't interested. Ryan smiled sadly. I thought you weren't interested. Ethan shook his head. We were idiots. Completely. Ryan looked toward the city. I remember one time you sat beside me in the library. Ethan smiled. You were drawing. You asked what I was working on. I remember. I couldn't answer. Why? Because I was so nervous I forgot how words worked. Ethan laughed. I thought you didn't want to talk to me. Ryan covered his face. This is painful. I know. They both laughed again. Then Ethan became quiet. There was another reason I never said anything. Ryan looked at him. What? I didn't know if you felt the same way. Ryan nodded slowly. I understand. Ethan looked directly at him. I was afraid that if I said something, I'd lose whatever small connection we had. Ryan's expression softened. I felt the same. You did? Yes. Then we really were idiots. Ryan smiled. Apparently. The wind moved gently across the rooftop. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ryan asked, Do you ever regret it? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Yes. Ryan's heart tightened. Me too. I think about it sometimes, Ethan said. What would have happened if I'd just told you? Ryan looked at him. Maybe we would have dated. Maybe. Maybe we would have lasted. Maybe. Maybe we would have broken up. Ethan smiled. Maybe. Ryan laughed. But at least we'd know. Exactly. They stood quietly. Then Ethan said something that made Ryan's heart stop. I searched for you after graduation. Ryan turned toward him. You did. I tried. Why? Ethan smiled faintly. Because I wasn't ready to let you disappear. Ryan's chest tightened. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd told you. Ryan looked at him for a long moment. 5 years. I know. 5 years because we were both scared. Ethan nodded. Ryan laughed softly. That's almost embarrassing. It is. Ethan stepped closer. Not enough to make Ryan uncomfortable. Just enough that the distance between them felt different. I can't change what happened back then, Ethan said. Ryan nodded. Neither can I. But maybe we don't have to. Ryan looked into his eyes. What do you mean? Ethan smiled. We have now. The words were simple, but they carried everything. 5 years of silence. 5 years of wondering. 5 years of missed opportunities. Ryan smiled. You're right. Ethan looked relieved. Good. Ryan took another sip of coffee. So what happens now? Ethan laughed. I don't know. That's not very confident. I've been waiting 5 years to talk to you. Give me a minute. Ryan laughed. Fair enough. They remained on the rooftop for another hour. They talked about school, university, their families, their dreams, the things they had regretted, the things they had never told anyone. And for the first time, Ryan didn't feel like he was talking to the boy he'd once secretly loved. He was talking to the man who had remembered him, the man who had been afraid too. When they finally walked toward the rooftop door, Ethan stopped. Ryan. Yeah. I meant what I said. About what? You were never invisible to me. Ryan smiled. And you were never invisible to me either. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No dramatic confession. No rushed moment. Just two people finally understanding the truth they had been too afraid to say years ago. They had both been waiting. They had both been hoping. And somehow, after 5 years, they had finally found their way back to each other. The days after their conversation on the rooftop felt different. Nothing had officially changed between Ryan and Ethan. They hadn't called themselves a couple. They hadn't made any promises. They hadn't even gone on a proper date. And yet, somehow, everything felt different. Ryan no longer had to wonder whether Ethan remembered him. He knew. He no longer had to question whether the feelings from high school had been one-sided. They hadn't been. And perhaps the strangest part was that knowing the truth didn't make Ryan's feelings disappear. It made them stronger. Every morning, Ryan found himself looking forward to seeing Ethan. Sometimes they met in the lobby before Ryan left for work. Sometimes Ethan would knock on his door with some completely unnecessary excuse. Once, he brought Ryan a package that had accidentally been delivered upstairs. Another time, he asked whether the heating in the apartment was working properly. Ryan eventually smiled at him and said, "You know, you don't actually have to invent reasons to check on me." Ethan looked slightly embarrassed. "I know. Then why do you keep doing it?" Ethan smiled. "Maybe I like seeing you." Ryan's heart immediately betrayed him. He tried to hide his smile. "That's a terrible landlord habit." "Probably." Their friendship became easy. They started having coffee together several mornings a week. Sometimes they talked for 20 minutes. Sometimes they stayed for more than an hour. They discovered they had more in common than either had realized. Both hated overly crowded restaurants. Both loved old movies. Both preferred quiet evenings to loud parties. And both had a strange habit of remembering insignificant details about each other. Ryan would remember exactly how Ethan took his coffee. Ethan remembered which pastries Ryan disliked. Ryan remembered Ethan's favorite restaurant. Ethan remembered that Ryan hated being late. It felt almost as if the years between them were slowly disappearing. But there was still one thing Ryan couldn't stop thinking about. The rental application. The moment Ethan had seen his name. Ryan had wondered about it ever since. One Friday evening, they were sitting on the balcony outside Ryan's apartment. The city was beginning to glow beneath the sunset. Ethan was holding a coffee cup while Ryan rested his arms against the railing. After several minutes of silence, Ryan finally asked, "Can I ask you something?" Ethan looked over. "Of course. When you saw my name on the rental application." Ethan's expression changed slightly. Ryan noticed immediately. "You knew it was me?" "I suspected. But you weren't sure?" "No." Ethan looked down at his coffee. "I stared at that application for almost an hour." Ryan smiled. "Seriously? Seriously? What were you thinking?" Ethan laughed quietly. "That I couldn't possibly be the same Ryan Parker." "Why?" "You had disappeared. I went to university. I know that now. Ethan looked toward the street. But back then, I didn't know where you were. Ryan's expression softened. What did you think happened? I thought you moved on. I did. Ethan smiled. Apparently not completely. Ryan looked at him. What did you mean? Ethan hesitated. Then he answered honestly. When I saw your name, I remembered everything. Ryan's heart began beating faster. Everything. Almost. Ethan smiled. The sketchbook. History class. The library. Your terrible handwriting. Ryan laughed. My handwriting wasn't terrible. It was. It was artistic. It was impossible to read. Ryan pushed his shoulder lightly. Ethan laughed. Then the laughter faded. I also remembered how much I liked you. Ryan became quiet. Ethan continued. I had spent years convincing myself that it was something I'd left behind. Ryan looked at him. And then your name appeared on my screen. He shook his head. And suddenly I was 17 again. Ryan smiled sadly. I know that feeling. For a moment, they looked at each other. Then Ryan asked, Did you want me to rent the apartment? Ethan smiled. That was the problem. What problem? I wasn't sure whether seeing you again was a good idea. Ryan looked surprised. Why wouldn't it be? Because I knew I'd have feelings. Ryan's breath caught. You were sure? Ethan nodded. I wasn't sure what kind. But I knew something would come back. Ryan looked down. What did you do? I almost rejected the application. Ryan looked at him in disbelief. What? Not because I didn't want you here. Then why? Because I was afraid. Of me. Of myself. Ryan didn't say anything. Ethan continued. I didn't want to turn your new home into something complicated. Ryan smiled faintly. And yet you approved me. I did. Why? Ethan looked directly at him. Because I realized I didn't want to lose another chance. Those words stayed between them. Ryan looked away, trying to control the emotions building inside him. After a moment, he asked the question that had been sitting inside him for weeks. If we had told each other the truth back then. Ethan waited. Would things have been different? The question seemed to stop everything. The sounds of traffic below. The distant voices. Even the wind seemed quieter. Ethan looked toward the city. Probably. Ryan nodded slowly. I think so too. Maybe we would have dated. Maybe. Maybe we would have stayed together. Maybe. Maybe we would have broken each other's hearts. Ethan smiled. That too. Ryan laughed softly. But at least we would have known. Ethan nodded. That's what I regret most. What? Not knowing. Ryan looked at him. You know what I regret? Ethan turned. I spent years thinking you didn't care. Ethan's expression softened. I spent years thinking you didn't care. Ryan smiled sadly. That's ridiculous. It is. We could have solved everything with one conversation. Probably. Ryan shook his head. 5 years. Ethan smiled. 5 years too late. Ryan looked at him. Or 5 years exactly when we needed them. Ethan's smile disappeared for a second. What do you mean? Ryan thought about it. I don't know. He looked around the apartment. This place. What about it? I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't taken that job. I wouldn't have met you again if you hadn't found it. And you wouldn't have renovated this building if your grandparents hadn't left it to you. Ethan nodded slowly. Ryan continued. And if your assistant hadn't handled the rental process, maybe we'd never have met. Ethan smiled. You're making this sound like a conspiracy. Maybe it is. Ethan laughed. Ryan smiled. But seriously. He looked at him. Maybe we weren't supposed to find each other back then. Ethan's expression became thoughtful. Maybe we needed those 5 years. For what? To become different people. Ethan looked down. Ryan continued. You weren't the same person you were in high school. Neither were you. And maybe that's why we're here now. Ethan was silent. Ryan smiled. If we dated at 17, maybe we wouldn't have lasted. Probably not. We were terrible at communication. We still are. Ryan laughed. True. Ethan looked toward him. But we're better now. Yeah. The word came quietly, almost like an agreement. They sat together in silence. Ryan thought about everything that had happened since moving into the apartment. He had originally thought the place was simply a lucky find. A beautiful apartment. A good location. An affordable rent. A new beginning. But now it felt like something else. It felt like a path. A path that had somehow led him back to the person he had spent years trying to forget. Ethan broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't rented this apartment? Ryan smiled. All the time. What do you think? I think I would have missed you again. Ethan looked at him. That scares me. Why? Because I don't want to think about another 5 years. Ryan's heart tightened. You won't have to. Ethan held his gaze. Promise. Ryan smiled. I'll try. I'll take that. The next morning, Ryan woke earlier than usual. He couldn't sleep. He made coffee and stepped onto the balcony. The city was still quiet. A few cars moved along the street. The sky was pale blue. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned. Ethan stood in the doorway. You're awake. So are you. I couldn't sleep. Me neither. Ethan walked toward him. Coffee. Ryan held up his cup. Already have one. Black. Of course. Ethan smiled. Ryan laughed. You're never going to stop remembering that, are you? No. They stood beside each other overlooking the street. Ryan thought about how strange life could be. 5 years ago, he had believed Ethan was completely out of his life. Now Ethan was standing beside him every morning. The person he had once thought was unreachable had somehow become the person he could talk to most easily. Ryan looked at him. Ethan. Yeah. I think I understand something now. What? Maybe coming here wasn't an accident. Ethan smiled. I've been thinking the same thing. Ryan looked toward the apartment. The place I thought was just an apartment. He looked back at Ethan. Maybe it was the place where our story was supposed to start again. Ethan smiled. Again? Ryan nodded. Maybe it started years ago. Ethan looked at him for several seconds. Maybe it just took us 5 years to realize it. Ryan smiled. Neither of them moved closer. Neither needed to. They didn't need to rush. They had already waited 5 years. For once, they had time. And as the sun slowly rose above the city, Ryan realized something he had never expected to understand. Sometimes life doesn't give you what you want when you want it. Sometimes it takes you away from something. Makes you grow. Makes you forget. Makes you believe the story is over. And then, years later, it brings that same person back into your life at the exact moment when you're finally ready. Maybe Ryan and Ethan had been 5 years too late. Or maybe they had arrived exactly when they were meant to. The next morning, Ryan woke up earlier than usual. For several seconds, he simply stared at the ceiling, trying to remember why he had woken up before his alarm. Then he remembered. Ethan. The conversation from the previous evening returned to him in fragments. 5 years. The feelings they had never admitted. The possibility that they had somehow found each other again at exactly the right time. Ryan smiled to himself. He got out of bed, made coffee, and walked toward the balcony. The city was slowly waking up. Cars moved quietly along the street. A few people hurried toward work. Somewhere below, someone opened a shop. Ryan was halfway through his coffee when his phone buzzed. Ethan, are you awake? Ryan smiled. Ryan, yes. A second message appeared. Ethan, good. I want to show you something. Ryan frowned. Ryan, that sounds suspicious. There was a pause. Ethan, maybe. Come downstairs in 10 minutes. Ryan laughed. Ryan, where are we going? Ethan replied almost immediately. Ethan, you'll see. 10 minutes later, Ryan stepped into the lobby. Ethan was waiting near the front entrance. He was wearing a simple dark jacket and jeans, looking much less like a landlord and much more like the person Ryan remembered from high school. When Ethan saw him, he smiled. Ready? Ryan nodded. Where are we going? You'll know when we get there. You really enjoy being mysterious. Apparently. They stepped outside. The morning air was cool, and the streets were still relatively quiet. They walked several blocks without saying much. Ryan occasionally glanced at Ethan. There was something different about him this morning. He seemed nervous. Ethan, who normally appeared calm about everything, kept putting his hands into his jacket pockets and taking them out again. Ryan finally laughed. You're nervous. Ethan looked at him. No, you are. I'm not. You've checked your phone 4 times in the last 5 minutes. Ethan smiled awkwardly. Maybe I'm nervous. Why? You'll find out. Ryan shook his head. They continued walking. After another few minutes, Ethan stopped outside a small cafe. Ryan looked through the window. His heart skipped. He knew this place. He hadn't been inside for years. But he remembered it. Wait. Ethan smiled. You remember? Ryan stared at the cafe. This was near our school. Exactly. Ryan looked at him. We used to pass this place every morning. I know. Ryan smiled. I didn't realize it was still here. I did. Ethan opened the door. Come on. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air. The cafe had changed slightly. The furniture was newer, the walls had been repainted, and the counter looked different. But the atmosphere was almost exactly the same. They chose a table near the window. Ryan sat down. Ethan sat opposite him. For a few moments, they simply looked around. I used to come here sometimes after school, Ryan said. I know. Ryan looked at him. You knew that too? Ethan smiled. You weren't very difficult to notice. Ryan laughed. I thought I was. You weren't. A waiter approached. Ethan ordered 2 coffees. Ryan raised an eyebrow. You already know what I want? Black. Ryan smiled. Of course. The waiter walked away. Ryan rested his elbows on the table. So why did you bring me here? Ethan looked out the window. I used to walk past this cafe every morning. I remember. You were usually on the other side of the street. Ryan smiled. I didn't know you noticed me. I always did. Ryan's heart tightened. Ethan continued. I used to think about walking over and talking to you. Why didn't you? I was scared. Ryan laughed softly. You really were nervous. Very. What stopped you? I didn't know what to say. Ryan shook his head. We really wasted a lot of time. We did. Their coffees arrived. Ethan thanked the waiter. For several seconds, he stared at his cup. Ryan noticed. You're nervous again. Ethan smiled. Maybe. Why? Ethan took a breath. I brought you here because there's something I want to ask. Ryan's heart began beating faster. Okay. Ethan looked at him. I've spent the last few weeks thinking about everything. Ryan nodded. Me too. I keep thinking about high school. So do I. And I keep thinking about all the things we didn't say. Ryan smiled faintly. Me too. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I don't want to make the same mistake twice. Ryan's expression softened. You won't. Ethan looked directly at him. I don't know what happens next. Neither do I. But I know I don't want to go back to pretending that I don't feel something. Ryan's heart was pounding. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he smiled nervously. Ryan, would you like to go on a real date with me? Ryan stared at him. For a moment, the entire cafe seemed to disappear. He could hear only the sound of his own heartbeat. A real date. Not a conversation between landlord and tenant. Not two old classmates remembering high school. Not two people wondering what might have happened. A real date. Ryan smiled. Yes. Ethan's shoulders relaxed instantly. Really? Ryan laughed. Really? I was prepared for a much longer answer. You're lucky. I am. Ryan took a sip of coffee. So when is this date? Ethan smiled. Tonight. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Tonight. I've waited 5 years. Ryan laughed. You're suddenly impatient? A little. I think I can make time. Ethan smiled. Good. They spent another hour at the cafe. They talked about everything and nothing. They discussed food, movies, travel, work, the future. But beneath every ordinary conversation was the strange knowledge that something important had changed. For the first time, they weren't wondering whether the other person felt the same. They knew. When they finally left the cafe, the morning had become brighter. They walked side by side down the street. Ryan looked at Ethan. You know what's strange? What? I used to walk past this cafe almost every day. So did I. And we never spoke. I know. Ryan smiled. What if we talked? Ethan thought about it. Maybe everything would have happened sooner. Maybe. Maybe we would have dated. Maybe. Maybe we'd have gotten tired of each other. Ryan laughed. Definitely possible. Ethan smiled. But I don't think we'll ever know. Ryan looked ahead. I'm okay with that. Really? Yeah. He turned toward Ethan. Because I like where we are now. Ethan smiled. So do I. They continued walking. When they reached the building, Ethan stopped at the entrance. Ryan looked at him. What? Ethan smiled. Nothing. You're staring. I know. Ryan laughed. Professional landlord behavior? Not anymore. Ryan raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? Ethan stepped slightly closer. Today I'm just Ethan. Ryan smiled. And I'm just Ryan. Exactly. They stood there for a moment. Then Ethan opened the door. See you tonight? Ryan nodded. Definitely. Ryan walked upstairs. But halfway to his apartment, he stopped. He turned around. Ethan was still standing in the lobby. Their eyes met. Ryan smiled. Ethan smiled back. Then Ryan continued upstairs. Inside his apartment, he closed the door and leaned against it. He couldn't stop smiling. 5 years ago, he had loved Ethan from a distance. He had watched him from classroom doorways. He had listened to his laughter from across the school courtyard. He had imagined conversations that never happened. Then graduation came. Ryan left. He convinced himself that the feelings would eventually disappear. For years they did. Or at least he thought they had. Then one apartment listing appeared. One application. One name. One unexpected meeting at an old brick building. And suddenly, the past had returned. But this time, it wasn't asking Ryan to look backward. It was giving him a chance to move forward. That evening, Ryan got ready for the date. He stood in front of the mirror longer than necessary. He changed his shirt twice. Then he laughed at himself. What am I doing? He had gone to school with Ethan. He had known him for years. Why was he nervous now? Because this time was different. This time, there was no pretending. No hiding. No guessing. When Ryan walked downstairs, Ethan was waiting outside. He looked at Ryan and smiled. You look good. Ryan smiled. So do you. They started walking. Neither of them knew exactly where the evening would take them. Maybe dinner. Maybe another coffee. Maybe a long walk through the city. It didn't matter. They had already waited long enough. As they walked beneath the streetlights, Ryan glanced at Ethan. Do you ever think about how strange this is? All the time. 5 years ago, I thought I'd never see you again. I thought the same. And now? Ethan smiled. Now I can't imagine not seeing you. Ryan looked down, trying to hide his smile. That's a pretty good answer. I've had 5 years to practice. Ryan laughed. They kept walking. Their shoulders occasionally brushed. Neither moved away. The city around them continued as usual. People hurried home. Cars passed. Lights filled the streets. But for Ryan, everything felt strangely peaceful. He had once believed losing Ethan was simply part of growing up. Now he understood something different. Sometimes people leave your life because the timing isn't right. Sometimes years have to pass before two people become ready to understand what they once couldn't say. And sometimes, when you least expect it, life gives you another chance. Ryan looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. Neither said anything. They didn't need to. They were finally walking together. Not as landlord and tenant. Not as two classmates remembering the past. But as two people who had been given another opportunity to discover what they could have been. And this time, neither of them planned to let fear decide for them. Ryan smiled as they continued down the quiet street. 5 years ago, they had missed their chance. But perhaps they hadn't really lost it. Perhaps it had simply been waiting for them. Waiting for the right city. The right moment. The right version of themselves. And finally, the right time to begin again. They had missed their chance once, but life had given them another one. Red Heart.